Hello, hello. We'll get started in just a few minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Posted a link to the agenda in the Zoom chat. So if you'd like to mark your attendance, if you have any open items you'd like to discuss, please add that to the agenda.
Okay, I'm new to this work group, so far today I am mostly the observer mode, so I have
Oh, nope.
nothing
No
to
worries at all. Everybody is welcome. We'll get started a few minutes after the hour. I posted a link to the agenda in the chat. Feel free to peruse it. I unfortunately fear that attendance will be light today because I believe it's a public holiday in Australia.
And
But
also in China and then Vietnam, yeah.
we will carry forward bravely without them, but trying to start a new habit of this call regularly happening. We'll give it one more minute and then I'll get rolling. All right, I found Jonathan's two issues and we will get started for today. Welcome to the inaugural Vulnerability Disclosure Working Group, a very special APAC friendly time zone call. I am Krob. I'm the working group lead for this and several other OpenSSF projects. Information about our working group can be found not only at the top of this meeting agenda, link to our Git repo, a link to our Slack channel. There's also a link to the OpenSSF YouTube channel. Every meeting of the OpenSSF is recorded and is publicly available. So if you're ever curious about any of the activities of any of the working groups, SIGs, or projects, typically that's a great place to start and kind of get up to speed with current activities of the group. We had some requests from my friends from Google, who I believe manage the OSV project, to start this time start this call so we can better engage with our friends from around the globe. And so today's the first, and I mentioned it's public holidays, so we'll have light attendance, but ideally we'll have this meeting every month, which in the States is the last Thursday. And for you folks, probably it'll be Friday morning. And we'll ideally carry this on well into the future. And it's a chance to better collaborate with the different parts of the foundation. So as is tradition in all the working groups, we go around and introduce ourselves. So again, I'll start. I'm Krob. I'm the working group lead for the Vulnerability Disclosure Working Group. I'm also the chair for the Open Source Security Incident Response Team SIG, Developer Best Practices Working Group, Education SIG, the Diagrammer Society SIG. I'm a representative of the Technical Advisory Committee, and I also participated in the Public Policy Committee and the new Governance Committee. I work at Intel. I'm a director of security communications here, and I get to play with open source stuff for fun. I've been engaged in open source for about open source security for about a decade. I used to work at Red Hat with the product security team, and I've been able to carry on with my work here at Intel to continue my engagement with the OpenSSF. So would either of you gentlemen like to introduce yourselves and say hello?
Okay, so start myself. So I'm Munakata from the Renaissance Japan, and thank you for having this Asian-friendly time zone. So that's a motivation to join and to understand what we're doing. And actually, the only two companies joining the OpenSSF at this time from Japan. Maybe three companies, and we start discussing about how to contribute the entire open source activities. And this is I want to understand this working group, because not many working groups are active. So your staff and disclosure staff and also the best practice staff is the most active currently working. So I want to understand what you're doing, and I want to find a way to how to contribute to the staff. But actually, I'm I'm a chip company, the Renaissance, so I'm not a security specialist. So still in the very early learning curve, but we try to encourage my team and also the Japan as companies so to contribute more to the OpenSSF. So that's about it. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Welcome. We're very glad to have you. And that very much was noted that we have okay engagement with Europe, and Asia in particular is kind of a gap for us. So we're hoping to improve that this year. So welcome. I'm glad you're able to participate.
Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Munawar Hafiz. I'm from the US. So I spoke with you like over because we are organizing this virtual summit for open source maintainers. So, but never like formally met with you. So I don't know, like, how do I refer to you? Should I call you Christopher, or am I?
My nickname is Krob.
Yeah, I know, but I mean,
but yeah,
do you consider myself that I can call you?
Hey, you, whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay, but yeah, so I'm the CEO of a static analysis tool company. We're building a better tool that detects bugs that other tools miss. Also does that with dramatically low false positive. I have participated in this group some time ago, but not recently. I mean, in the past few weeks, especially since like Jonathan joined in Alpha Omega project, and he was like pushing something in this particular group. I was planning to attend, but then because of the timing, it just didn't work out yet. But I mean, that's something that I plan to attend. I didn't realize that there are two meetings that will be organized every month. Like there's one that's the US time, the regular time, and then there's this one in addition.
So the regular working group meets twice monthly, and that's during early morning hours. So we have a lot of European participants, so we are able to pick up them. And then this call, depending on participation, we're going to start off with monthly. And as we go along, if we have a lot of interest, we're welcome. We can ratchet that up so we can have more frequent calls with this time zone, and potentially even adjust it further back. But just of the people that participated in the survey, this was acceptable for most of them, the largest number. But again, we're looking to try this out and see if we can engage with our friends over in APAC more.
Sure. So what we are doing is, so we are working with I'm mostly working with the identifying security threats and the Alpha Omega groups, and we have built a triaging dashboard of, like, we have run on the top for now on the top 1,000 Python projects in the PyPI repository. We are considering expanding on that. And then there's a triaging dashboard that we have created where we then manually triage those vulnerabilities and then submit those reports. And I was involved in this email Slack storm. I mean, is that if that's a term yesterday, about what are the, and this is something that, so in the past couple of weeks, we have submitted about 20 something manually vetted bug fixes, bugs / potential vulnerabilities for some of the projects that we were scanning. And we have also gotten similar response. I mean, they're like cease and desist, never come. And because ours was submitted through the open refactory handle, so it appeared like people thought it was a bot or something. It was not, like there were human who were behind it. But we are also trying to understand what is, like Jonathan is looking at a depth first approach, like looking at a particular vulnerability that is maybe found in many places, and how do you create an automated PR for doing that. We are doing it on a breadth first approach, as in we are looking at what is our tool finding or what other tools are finding, then do that triaging, manually reporting and working with that. So not going in the automated route. Yet we got the same heat or similar heat about drive-by PRs or automated bot submitting stuff. But the good news is so out of the 20 that we submitted, there's I think 6 or 7 that have already been accepted, 6 or 7 that got okay, yeah, no, go away, that kind of stuff. So the hatred and the acceptance is similar. And then there's a bunch that are still waiting. And what was interesting was, maybe I can go into a little bit as we go ahead. But the point is I want to learn, and now I think it's better to come to this group more. That kind of, because as we are collaborating with people, it's a security is still in the end a human activity as well. How do we collaborate with the maintainers to make it easy for them to appreciate and get there? And we'll make mistakes and they'll make mistakes. It's fine. But what's the best way to collaborate there? So I'm here to learn about that. So that's why I got I saw this and I just I saw your text and I on Slack, and I thought I'll just join and
Great.
Start learning from today. Yes.
And he's referring to issue 123 that Jonathan Leishoun
yes
recently just issued this week.
Yes, he dragged me into this. I mean, I'm not necessarily doing the automated PR, but we are looking at it. As I said, we want to, both of us are passionate about getting these bugs fixed that are out there. There are even low-hanging fruits for his cases, because there's a tool that found all of this. It's an old vulnerability, 5 or 6 years old, yet tens of thousands of projects are probably still vulnerable or weak. So how can we do security hardening? So he's very passionate from that end. I'm not necessarily too much subscribed on the rewriting end, because my background is on building refactoring tools, and so I know how hard writing good refactorings are. And so part of the reason that Slack storm happened was because of somebody doing massive amount of PRs, but then the codes were not compiling, and so that creates an extra annoyance and so on. So, but anyway, I mean, there's different layers of stuff that we can discuss.
Yeah, and that's Jonathan has been engaged with our group for a while in his previous roles. It's a very delicate situation. In general, the working group, I posted a link to our Git repository, which is also on the agenda, and it's at the top of our Slack channel. I would encourage, if you're not part of it, to join. Our primary viewpoints that we're trying to address would be upstream maintainers and developers. That's primarily the constituents that we work for. We're trying to provide tooling for to make their jobs easier. We do also want to address and try to help educate the security research or the finder persona, because as you folks are finding things and reporting them, we want to make sure that we have a positive experience with the maintainer community. We're also going to be addressing the consumer standpoint. So think about an enterprise like a bank or an insurance company or a retailer that embeds open source projects in their platforms, or they have vendors that supply them open source platforms. So we're looking to also try to provide education for the consumer persona, so they understand how vulnerabilities are managed and how they're shared and ultimately communicated. So that's kind of the high level things we're trying to address. And we do this through white papers or educational materials. We do it through some tooling. Again, a big part of the kind of the genesis of this call is there's a group that puts out, it's called OSV. It's open source vulnerabilities. It's like a database of open source vulnerabilities. So we're looking to try to help better incorporate them within the work within the OpenSSF. So ideally, through these calls, we'll be able to have that communication. And then, like Jonathan's issue he just filed, that's an interesting problem that we could definitely talk about, and be a sounding board. Make a forum that we can maybe get developers and researchers in the same room and try to maybe hammer out some good ideas and best practices to help advise people that this is, if you want to conduct these behaviors, these are good ways, and they're going to have more positive outcomes than just the drive-by, which is a very common comment we get from a lot of maintainers.
So when we, let me just share one experience. So as we were like submitting these PRs, there were two things that, so when people rejected our review or our bug request, we got actually two kind of responses. One is like the security vulnerability that we posted, it's not, so their attack surface is not there, or it was sometimes our mistake. A few times there were our mistakes where of identifying something as tainted, but is actually not. Like in one case, we identified that there is a request that is coming, it's from the request, HTTP request, so it should be tainted or marked as tainted, except that in that particular application, that request is coming from GitHub commit data, which is because like GitHub does a vetting, so there's no script tags, etc., cannot be there in the commit. I mean, that's something that we can't know unless we're that deeply involved in that project. Or in another case, we posted a log injection and say like, well, our logs are unstructured, so we don't care what gets put on, so no problem of log injection. Again, something that we cannot know about that. And people got annoyed, like we don't know, but I mean, we get it. I mean, we don't have the time to do like in-depth, I mean, we can't be participating in that project to understand and then report, because we also want to fix things quickly if possible and point things out. But then there's the other side, which was curious. So this is one where there were mistakes from our part and people didn't appreciate that. I totally get that. The other side was the fix was valid, the bug was valid, but it was just rejected because people thought it's a robot doing it. And yeah, it's not like a vulnerability. It was more a benign kind of stuff, like in a couple of places where there were some logical short circuits in code that our tool identified. We reported that. That's valid, no doubt about it. But then people said, well, I will just reject it because it's coming from. So how do we come out of that stigma? Mm-hmm. And Jonathan was suggesting that perhaps posting that from a personal GitHub account as opposed to like at Open Refactory handle, that actually tremendously helps because people have a different opinion towards that. But right. Again, I mean, these are some stuff that we are learning, and I just want to share because you might be familiar with that. But I mean, this is just anecdotal evidence that I'm bringing in from this experiment we are running.
This is a tension I've dealt with a long time throughout my career at Red Hat, and currently, the best practices working group last year or 2021, we had a project called the Great MFA Distribution, where we tried to give away multi-factor tokens to the critical project maintainers and projects. And I know exactly how that response goes. If you're lucky to get a response, if you're lucky enough to talk to a person, a lot of these maintainers can be paranoid, not trusting. And I definitely get the Jonathan's approach of going from a human perspective. Hey, I'm a real person. This is a person putting this and not a bot. So yeah, I think we definitely have something we can collaborate on and put some guidance together and possibly incorporate it into one of our work products to help coach security researchers. Here's some techniques that you can take as you're trying to report these vulnerabilities that you can be more successful. And I think that that'll be there's going to be a very robust and interesting conversation around the vulnerability at scale reporting topic. So I'm looking forward to that over the next couple of weeks. And to kind of talk about our working group, we're divided up into a couple different teams that work on different things. One of the items we're working on is called the Open Source Software Security Incident Response Team. Last year, the foundation put out a mobilization plan that they said, here are 10 items we feel that if there was investment in, that it could substantially improve the security profile of open source software and communities and supply chains. So one of those sections, I believe it was section 5, was the idea of creating an incident response team. So one of our, it's a SIG, a special interest group, a group of us get together and we talk about how could we create a security team for upstream. And that plan is currently under review by the TAC. And ultimately, if they once we make some changes and edits that they propose, it'll go up to the governing board for potential funding. And what this would mean, and there's a vast volume of information. If you're curious about this, we could talk more, but I have a lot of information posted in our Git repo and our notes about what we've talked about, what our goals are. And then we have the re-proposal of the plan for security incident response. And another avenue for this, like issue 123, is potentially maybe upstream maintainers might be more amenable to, like, the OpenSSF being a vehicle to convey these vulnerability reports. And again, I don't know that that would be accepted by the group, but that's a potential option we can discuss. Is if this CERT is formed, maybe that CERT helps coordinate and manage that communication from between the researcher and the maintainer. And there's a lot of detail. The plan is broken up into 3 parts of how we can build the right tooling and infrastructure, recruit the team, and then talks about some of the processes that we envision the piece or this CERT could follow. So that's one of our work items. Another work item is we have created several coordinated vulnerability disclosure guides. So our first guide was instructions for open source maintainers and developers. This is how you can react to security researchers or other parties reporting vulnerabilities and flaws to you, and how you can follow good practice in coordinating the triage, remediation, and ultimately patching and disclosure of these issues. So that was our first guide. It's been in existence for almost 2 years now.
I've seen that. I've seen that particular guide, yes.
Awesome. And that was very successful. A lot of good feedback on that from maintainers in the community. And so because of that, last year we wrote a new guide focused on security researchers, on how they best can engage with open source and report security vulnerabilities ethically and responsibly, and making sure that things are effectively communicated. And we provide some guidance on if there is a breakdown in your reporting process, some steps they might be able to take. And that's where, like, the Jonathan's suggestion of having your report come from a person's email address, that's probably good feedback that we could incorporate back into that guide and keep it updated. And then, based off the feedback we got on those 2 guides, we're just now creating a new work item where we'll be talking about how downstream consumers can understand upstream vulnerability coordination, places they should monitor, and behaviors they should take to protect themselves if they use, which they probably do, if they use open source software. So things like understanding, what is your support agreement? Do you have a supplier that supplies this software to you? Are you directly pulling it from upstream, and kind of talk about the differences there? So just providing some advice for consumers on how best to protect themselves and manage their risk with open source vulnerability management. We also are now, based off of those guides, one of our members from Google is looking at trying to create some automated tooling to go in concert with those guides, so that, we advise maintainers, you should have a security, like a vulnerability disclosure policy, and you should have a security MD file that describes what you do when vulnerabilities come in. So we potentially could create a canned template that is very easy for them to update and use for their own, kind of fork that and use that for their own purposes. We potentially could provide tools through GitHub Actions, or I can't recall what the analogous tool is in GitLab, but basically provide some scripts to allow some of the automation handling, like maybe creating vulnerability advisories, security advisories, maybe automating some of that. So we have a member that's researching that, and that's going to be one of our new projects, is trying to provide tooling for both researchers and maintainers and eventually consumers on how to get up to speed on vulnerabilities. We have the open source vulnerability team, which is a database, kind of parallels NVD or GSD, but they're trying to collect all the information about vulnerabilities reported within open source. And right now it's related to a couple different communities. And I think through these calls in this time, we'll be able to potentially help expand the use of that and potentially get that integrated into more communities and better integrated within the kind of the CVE / vulnerability identifier ecosystem. And then just yesterday, we have a new project we might be taking on. Within the industry, there's a proposal for a new security vulnerability advisory piece of information. It's called VEX, Vulnerability Exchange. And I've got some links in the call from yesterday. I'll repost in this call. But basically, the idea is, as a software maintainer is writing up their security advisory and going public with their patch, by providing a couple additional pieces of information in the VEX format, we can describe to downstream consumers, is the software affected? Is it affected? Is it not affected? And kind of give some information about why it's not effective. And that could definitely help with, as you were describing about, kind of not understanding how some of this software works. So if your maintainer had replied back with more of like an automated VEX response, that potentially could have given you more information about why that vulnerability wasn't exploitable. And VEX kind of goes in partnership with another industry thing called SBOMs, Software Bill of Material, which is getting a lot of talk in the US and the EU. Actually, I believe the EU will be passing some legislation making a version of SBOMs kind of the law of the land in the European Union this year. And I have heard similar talks in Australia and I believe other Asian countries. So while it started in the US, you'll see things like SBOM becoming more globally focused. And we think by kind of jumping early on to VEX, we can help get ahead and help a consumer who has a software bill of materials, which is a list of components inside the software they use. And VEX can say, this component has a vulnerability, but you're not affected. This other component has a vulnerability, but you are affected, and here's how to get the patch. So it's just an augmentation of the advisory and vulnerability information that's provided. So we're probably going to take on a couple software projects and kind of work on evangelizing the adoption of VEX across the industry with groups like FIRST, the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams, and then global governments. Mm-hmm. And so that's the kind of the current working activities we have on the docket. And then yesterday, Jonathan filed the 2 issues. One is around, he wants to get a group together to talk about how we can kind of collaborate on solving the problem of reporting vulnerabilities at scale. You run a scanner and you find dozens, hundreds, thousands of vulnerabilities in a project. How best can you get that reported? So ideally, if the group votes to adopt that, we will have some interesting discussions, and we'll try to get a good cross representation from consumers, maintainers, and researchers to kind of have a vigorous debate and kind of try to see if we can find a way forward for the whole ecosystem to be able to do that type of work. And then he also, there's a smaller project he proposed, issue 122, which is, could we please help them write a security policy for the Alpha Omega project, which I think Madison Oliver from GitHub and I'll probably grab that and just help them write it.
Okay.
And so that's what we're doing today. And I'm curious to hear from you two. What do you think of that docket of work? Is there anything that's appealing you'd like to hear more about? Or do you have any other suggestions of work maybe we can collaborate on together?
I mean, this looks pretty comprehensive. I mean, and as I said, I'm still like finding my way through this particular group. I previously joined this one for a couple of meetings, but then found, because I'm in the, like, as a tool vendor, there's more alignment with the Alpha Omega and the other groups, so that's why. And there's always like a finite amount of time that you have. So that's why. But now that, I mean, we are reporting it to people, not necessarily vulnerabilities, there's bugs, there's security hardening things, and so on. But then these issues now are becoming center stage as far as I'm concerned, because how do we effectively do that without creating a lot of friction? And also, like, there's reputation of our company that's also at stake. I mean, if people perceive us as bots, that's not a good good perception that you want to have, right? I mean, so it's from that perspective I come here and come here again and try to learn. So I mean, this is I'll find my way through it, and hopefully, like, at some point be able to jump into contribution. I know Madison, by the way, and so yeah, and it's nice to meet you.
Same. Thank you. I'm glad you were able to come here today and participate with us.
Sure.
And to address like the Japanese perspective, just late last year, we had our inaugural OpenSSF Day in Japan, which I didn't have the opportunity to attend, but I'm told, I talked with David Wheeler, he's one of the OpenSSF employees. I was told from him that it was very well attended. We got a really good response from the Japanese community. Like, we announced our training from the best practices group has been translated into Japanese and available for native speakers. So I think that was so successful that you will continue to see that again in 2023. And I think there's definitely going to be more outreach around the globe. And I think APAC and Africa are two regions we don't have a lot of engagement with, but we'd really like to get more feedback and opinions from those parts of the world.
Okay, I am attending that meeting. Actually, that was very nice. And frankly, today you're talking about the current employment it's open source developers and maintenance. And unfortunately, most of the attendee was a consumer of the open source stacks, but they're very curious about understanding how to tackle with that. Because formerly, in the maybe 10, 15 years ago, so many things are open source, they are dangerous things, but many people start thinking about this incorrect understanding, and they need to fully understand how to manage such kind of exposing such kind of information and how to fix them in short time period. So that kind of study is we are now penetrating the many companies. And of course, actually, I'm the chip company, and I have been contributing some of the device driver stuff. So that might relate to some of the potential vulnerability things. But in general, also because many people start using tons of the open source combined, and they don't understand where is the most critical part. So we should understand the overview of such kind of the open source landscape, and we need to prioritize which part to start with. So this, actually, I'm working with Fukuya-san, is Linux Foundation Japan managers, and to encourage the people from the IT industries and the telecom industry to jump into these activities. So I think that's a very nice start point, and we need to keep some kind of a momentum to increase some of the visibility in Japan and Asia. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And not to discourage you from participating here. I would love for you to continue to participate, but 2 additional areas you might want to try to monitor. There is an end user working group, and it's led by a gentleman out of the UK, Jonathan Meadows, and they're focused on consumers of open source. So they are a lot of Europeans, so I don't expect that meeting time will change, but you definitely can monitor the output and watch the working group calls, because they are definitely focused on, you know, kind of the use case of most of the audience that was there last year. And then the other group, the best practices working group, we're creating a battery of open source education. So we have a whole other part of the mobilization plan where we're creating more training, and there will be training for maintainers, but also things like development managers, auditors, people that are responsible for reviewing companies that use open source, and then also open source consumers. So that would be another potentially useful stream just to keep an eye on, to monitor. And I do think the best practices group probably will start a APAC focused call as well, probably the second half of the year. So again, I would love to see more engagement over there.
Thank you. Yeah, nice. Okay. Yeah, we plan to have some very fast Japanese OpenSSF meetup in the late February.
Yeah.
So we plan to make some agenda for that. So I think definitely add your suggestion to them.
Excellent. Well, and if you need any literature or any information about the foundation, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'd be glad to share presentations or links to help you kind of share the message with those constituents there.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
You're very welcome, sir. So are there any other, do you feel like, talking about the docket of work we have, is there anything that either of you would be interested in learning more about, or potentially, you know, bringing back to this call to have more further conversations? I know that the vulnerabilities at scale is definitely of interest, but are there any of the other topics we talked about that might be of interest to bring a guest speaker or bring that debate or conversation to this particular call next time?
Interesting. I mean, I was at the academia before, and I know about some academics who were working on, like, specifically like this aspect of, like, the human aspect of security and such. So maybe, like, involve. I'll just, like, spread the word out and see.
Please.
If some of them are interested to join. I guess, like, you guys will also appreciate. I mean, I see from other working groups, but I don't see many people from the academics. It's still like the industry people, and like, this is a forum which is less rigorous. So I feel like there's many academics that could have gotten some benefits out of joining, but it hasn't happened so far. And frankly, like, I'm also too far away from the academia right now to initiate anything. But I'll just, like, pass the word around. So.
I've been very lucky that this vulnerability group has had several academics visit and participate for a while. We tend to see some folks from academia in a couple of the working groups. It's not quite as in, we'd like better engagement with, you know, folks from all parts of the spectrum, but it tends to be most students when you're going for your master's or your dissertation for your doctorate, they'll have to have some project. So they'll generally come and listen to us, and then I've had a lot of presentations with students presenting their work and ideas.
Interesting.
All right. I know next time we will have, I know of it, several friends from Australia that will be joining the call. But beyond that, please share the word. We really want this call to grow and have many participants, and kind of be able to get your feedback and ideas on things that we need to be working on and help address issues in your communities.
Yeah, I invite my friend this next time. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else you'd like to discuss? If not, we can adjourn.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your days. Cheers.
Bye.